There is a moment, you have seen it, even if you cannot name exactly which one, where Lionel Messi receives the ball under pressure, five defenders collapsing around him like a closing fist, and does something that makes the crowd go silent before it erupts. Not because he was fast, not simply because he was skilled, but because what he did seemed to belong to a different category of human movement entirely. For decades, the world has been trying to explain it. Coaches, scientists, journalists, rivals, even Messi himself. And the most popular answer, the one that spreads across the internet, repeated in comment sections and barbershop debates and school playgrounds on 6 continents, is the simplest one. He was just born that way. Born different. Born better. Born with something in his blood that other men don't possess. But what if that answer is not just incomplete? What if it's wrong? What if the most extraordinary athletic career in modern history was shaped not by a single miraculous gene, but by something far more interesting? A collision of biology, medicine, environment, neuroscience, and thousands upon thousands of decisions made in the dark by a child, a family, a club, and a set of doctors who believed in something they could not yet fully explain? That is what this documentary is actually about. Not the myth of Messi, the science of him. In the age of the internet, legends travel faster than facts, and the legend of Lionel Messi, the one built not from journalism but from collective wonder, goes something like this. A boy was born in a small city in Argentina with genetics so extraordinary, so specific and rare, that football greatness was essentially encoded into him before he drew his first breath. Some fans point to his low center of gravity as evidence of genetic design. Others cite his balance, which appears almost inhuman in certain clips. The way he absorbs contact that would floor other men and keeps running, like a gyroscope that cannot be knocked off its axis. Still others talk about his vision, the ability to see the entire pitch in a single glance, to know where players are before he looks, to pass into spaces that haven't opened yet. The internet has done what the internet does. It is amplified, distorted, and mythologized. There are YouTube videos with tens of millions of views claiming to decode Messi's genetic secret. Articles written in breathless prose about his superhuman DNA. Comment threads that read like scripture, the faithful asserting that science has proven what fans already knew, that Messi is, at a biological level, a different species of athlete. Science has not proven that. What science has actually found is more interesting, more nuanced, and, if you are willing to sit with complexity, more inspiring than any myth. But first, we need to go back. Back to the beginning. Not the beginning the internet tells, but the real one. The one that started not with triumph, but with something much closer to fear. In 1987, in the city of Rosario, Argentina, a port city of broad avenues and intense football culture, the kind of place where children are given a ball before they can read, a boy named Lionel Andres Messi was born into a working-class family. His father, Jorge, worked in a steel factory. His mother, Celia, cleaned houses. Football was not just a pastime in their neighborhood, it was a language, a religion, a form of belonging. And from the moment Lionel could walk steadily enough to chase a ball, it became obvious that he understood this language differently from other children. By the age of 6, he was playing with boys several years older and holding his own. By 8, he was playing for his local club, Grandoli, and local coaches were already saying things privately, carefully, because you don't want to ruin a child with pressure that they had not said about other players. But here's the part that almost nobody tells correctly. At the age of 10, Lionel Messi stopped growing. Not slowed. Not fell slightly behind. Stopped, while his teammates inched upward through those crucial pre-adolescent years. Messi remained small, noticeably smaller than the children around him. His parents watched. His coaches noticed. And eventually, doctors were called. The diagnosis was growth hormone deficiency, a condition in which the pituitary gland does not produce adequate quantities of growth hormone, resulting in significantly stunted physical development. Without intervention, Messi would very likely have remained far below average height. His bones were not developing on the normal timeline. His physical trajectory, left untreated, pointed somewhere other than professional football. The treatment existed. Injections of synthetic growth hormone, administered regularly over an extended period. The therapy was well established in medicine. But it was expensive. Deeply, prohibitively expensive for a steel worker's family in Argentina in the late 1990s. The cost was estimated at roughly $900 per month. For a time, Newell's Old Boys, the Argentine club Messi played for, helped cover costs. Then the money ran out. What happened next is the pivot point of the entire story. A young scout from FC Barcelona watched footage of a small, extraordinary Argentine boy. He made a call. There was a meeting, and then, according to accounts from that period, a document was drawn up, not on official club paper, but on a paper napkin, because no official paper was immediately available, committing Barcelona to covering the cost of Lionel Messi's medical treatment in exchange for the right to develop him as a player. The boy was 13 years old. His family packed up their lives in Rosario and flew to a city they had never seen, in a country where they did not speak the language fluently, to take a chance on a piece of paper and the belief of men who had never signed a player quite like this. Almost nobody talks about what that actually means. The fear of it. The weight of it. A child separated from his friends, his grandmother, his streets, his language, the entire architecture of belonging that a childhood is built from, because a football club believed in what his body might become. That is not mythology. That is a family's extraordinary gamble. And science now gives us reason to think it may have changed everything. Here is where the story gets complicated in the best possible way. Because the question of what makes Lionel Messi extraordinary is not one question. It is many. And each one leads into a different room of science, genetics, neuroscience, exercise physiology, motor learning, developmental biology, and the answers in each room are interesting and partial, and none of them alone is sufficient. Let's start with genetics, because that's where the myth lives. Human athletic performance has a genetic component. This is established and uncontroversial in sports science. Studies of twins, particularly the large-scale Swedish research that compared identical and fraternal twins across dozens of physical attributes, consistently find that certain traits show strong heritability. Muscle fiber composition, for instance, is significantly influenced by genetics. The ratio of fast-twitch to slow-twitch muscle fibers, which affects explosive speed and power, varies between individuals, and part of that variation is inherited. But here's what sports geneticists are careful to say. The relationship between genes and elite athletic performance is not a direct line. There is no single gene for football genius. The human genome does not contain a becomes Messi sequence. What we inherit is a set of potentials, tendencies, ranges, capacities that must then be developed, trained, shaped, and refined over years of specific experience before they express themselves as anything approaching mastery. There are genes associated with muscle efficiency, genes that influence oxygen uptake, genes connected to tendon elasticity, genes that relate to recovery speed. An elite athlete may carry favorable versions of many of these, what researchers call a polygenic profile, but the probability that any specific human carries all the favorable variants in the necessary combination is vanishingly small, and even then, favorable genetics without elite development produces nothing. This is established science. It is not speculation. Now, what about Messi specifically? Here the science becomes more interesting. Because the most discussed aspects of his game, his balance, his low center of gravity, his reaction speed, his vision, are not purely genetic phenomena. They are developmental ones. They are things that form during childhood, shaped by experience, shaped by repetition, shaped by the specific environment a young nervous system inhabits during its most plastic years. Take balance. The human vestibular system, the inner ear structures that govern balance and spatial orientation, is extraordinarily trainable during childhood. Repeated physical challenge to balance during the developmental years appears to produce measurable structural and functional changes in the cerebellum, the brain region most associated with motor coordination. Children who spend thousands of hours on unstable surfaces, changing direction rapidly, absorbing unexpected contact. Children, in other words, who grow up playing football on uneven pitches, in tight spaces, against older and stronger players, develop proprioceptive systems that are different from those of children who don't. This is not speculation. This is motor learning research that has been conducted and replicated across multiple contexts. Messi, by every account, spent his early childhood playing football on whatever surface was available as often as possible against players older and bigger than himself. The balance that looks so extraordinary on a Champions League pitch, the balance that makes defenders look foolish as they slide through nothing, was almost certainly not simply given to him. It was built, repetition by repetition, fall by fall, recovery by recovery, over years of play that preceded any professional training. Then there is the question of his size. This is where it gets genuinely fascinating. Messi's adult height, approximately 169 centimeters or 5 feet 6.5 inches, is, in the context of modern professional football, below average. It was considered a potential disadvantage when he first appeared in professional football. Defenders were larger. Physical contests seemed mismatched. But there is a body mechanics argument, not yet fully established in the literature, but discussed among biomechanics researchers, that smaller stature combined with proportionally shorter limbs creates a lower center of gravity, and that a lower center of gravity, all else being equal, provides advantages in rapid direction changes. The physics are not complicated. A lower center of mass means less rotational inertia during turns, which translates to faster change of direction without loss of balance. If this is true, and the evidence is suggestive rather than conclusive, it means that the very physical characteristic that worried doctors, that prompted his medical treatment, that nearly ended his football career before it began, may have become one of the biomechanical foundations of his greatest strengths. Growth hormone therapy brought him to a height at which he could play professional football, but it may not have taken him so high that he lost the physical architecture that made him extraordinary. Sometimes the science of the body produces outcomes that no one planned. It is important to be precise here, because this section of Messi's story is where myth and medicine most dangerously blur. Growth hormone therapy. The treatment Messi received from approximately age 11 through his mid-adolescent years is a well-established medical intervention for children with diagnosed growth hormone deficiency. It is not a performance enhancer in the traditional sense. It does not build muscle beyond normal parameters. It does not increase strength above what a healthy, non-deficient individual would achieve. What it does, in the context of a deficient child, is restore normal development. Think of it this way. A child with growth hormone deficiency is like an engine running without enough oil. The engine can function, it can do things, it can demonstrate capacity, but it cannot develop correctly, and over time, without intervention, damage accumulates. Treatment does not supercharge the engine. It brings it up to the standard that biology intended. This distinction matters enormously for two reasons. First, it clarifies what the treatment can and cannot do. It cannot make a non-exceptional child exceptional. It cannot install football intelligence, reaction speed, pattern recognition, or any of the cognitive and perceptual qualities that actually distinguish elite footballers from ordinary ones. It restores the physical conditions under which those qualities, already present, already being developed, can continue to flourish. Second, it raises a question that is almost never asked. How many children with growth hormone deficiency across the world had the condition and did not receive treatment because their families could not afford it? Because the diagnosis was missed? Because no football club offered to pay for it? How many potential greatnesses ended in a doctor's waiting room, or in a family's financial calculations, or simply in the absence of the right person watching at the right moment? This is not a comfortable question. Science does not answer it. But it is the question that the science implies. What Messi received was not an advantage over healthy children. It was the removal of a disadvantage that should not have existed in the first place. and it was given to him because a group of men in Barcelona believed strongly enough in something they saw in him to make an unusual bet. That bet changed football history. The boy who arrived in Barcelona in 2000, 13 years old, small for his age, speaking Spanish with an Argentine accent that set him apart immediately, that boy entered an institution that had been thinking systematically about football development for decades. La Masia. The Farmhouse. Barcelona's famous youth academy, named for the 18th century building that originally housed it on the edge of the Camp Nou complex. La Masia was not merely a football school. It was, by the time Messi arrived, something closer to a laboratory, though its practitioners would not have used that word, for the scientific development of football intelligence. The coaching philosophy that had been slowly assembled there over years placed extraordinary emphasis on things that other academies of that era largely ignored. Not just technique, not just fitness. Decision-making, pattern recognition, football IQ. The Barcelona method, influenced significantly by the philosophy of Johan Cruyff, who had transformed the club's identity in the late 1980s, was built on the belief that the game is primarily a cognitive activity. That the difference between good players and great players is not ultimately found in their legs, but in their minds, in the speed and accuracy of the decisions they make under pressure, in their ability to read the geometry of the pitch, the spaces, the movements, the possibilities, faster and more accurately than anyone around them. This philosophy had direct scientific underpinnings, even if those underpinnings were not always articulated in scientific language. Research in motor learning and sports expertise, much of it drawing on the foundational work of K. Anders Ericsson on deliberate practice and on studies of expert perception in complex domains, consistently shows that elite performers in any high-speed, decision-rich environment develop cognitive shortcuts that non-experts don't possess. They see patterns rather than individual elements. They chunk information. A group of players becomes a single recognized formation, processed instantly, rather than 5 separate individuals requiring separate analysis. This chunking, this pattern library, is built through years of high-quality, carefully structured repetition. Not mindless repetition, deliberate repetition. With feedback, with increasing challenge, with specific attention to the cognitive demands of the activity. La Masia, at its best, was a deliberate practice machine. And Messi, in this environment, did something that the coaches would later describe with a kind of quiet awe. He learned faster than anyone they had seen. Not because the drills were easy for him. Often they were not, but because there was something in the way he processed what he experienced on a training pitch that allowed him to integrate it, to convert it into usable pattern recognition at an extraordinary rate. While most children went home after training, Messi stayed. Again and again. Thousands of invisible repetitions that the television cameras never showed. Thousands of moments of feedback from coaches, from teammates, from the immediate consequence of success and failure that were adding, brick by brick, to a cognitive architecture that would eventually allow him to make decisions in match situations that seemed, to observers, impossible. But this is where it becomes crucial to resist the temptation of a simple story. It was not practice alone. Practice without the right cognitive material to work with produces competence, not genius. And it was not talent alone. Raw capacity without the right environment to shape and challenge it goes undeveloped. It was both. Interacting, over time, in a specific place, with specific people, under specific conditions that would not have produced the same outcome anywhere else. The convergence of biology and environment. The equation that sports science is still, honestly, working to fully understand. Let's talk about what is actually happening inside Lionel Messi's head when he plays football. Not poetically, scientifically, as best as current neuroscience and sports science allow us to understand. There is a study conducted by researchers at the University of Copenhagen, published in the journal Neuroimage, that asked football players of varying skill levels to watch game scenarios and predict what would happen next, while their brain activity was measured. The researchers found that expert players showed markedly different neural activation patterns from non-experts when processing the same visual information. They were recruiting different regions, engaging different networks, doing something cognitively distinct with what their eyes were delivering. There is other research from sports vision science on what is called quiet eye, a phenomenon first identified by Joan Vickers at the University of Calgary, in which elite performers in precision sports exhibit a specific pattern of gaze fixation immediately before executing a skilled action. They look at fewer things, but they look at the right things for precisely the right duration. Applied to football, this research suggests that elite midfielders and attackers, the role Messi has occupied throughout most of his career, develop the ability to gather the specific perceptual information they need from the relevant areas of the visual field with a speed and selectivity that non-experts cannot match. This is what people call Messi's vision. It is not that he has physically different eyes. It is not that his visual cortex processes light differently. It is that through years of high-repetition engagement with football situations, his brain has learned to extract the information that matters from the scene in front of him, the positions, the movements, the spatial relationships, faster and more efficiently than players who have had less experience, or who have had different experience, or whose developmental trajectory didn't include the specific pattern-building environment that La Masia provided. The concept of neuroplasticity is central here. The brain changes in response to experience. This is now one of the most robustly established findings in modern neuroscience, not a theory, but a documented biological reality. Neural pathways that are used frequently are strengthened. Connections that are challenged repeatedly develop greater efficiency. The brain of an elite athlete is physically different from the brain of a non-athlete in measurable ways, different in the regions associated with the specific demands of their sport. The motor cortex of a professional violinist is different from the motor cortex of someone who has never played an instrument. The hippocampus of a London taxi driver who must memorize the entire road network of one of the world's most complex cities is measurably larger in the relevant regions than that of the average person. These are documented, replicated findings. Elite football at the highest level, practiced for tens of thousands of hours from childhood, changes the brain. What this means for Messi is that the decisions he makes in real time, the pass into space, the dribble through a closing gap, the shot placed precisely despite multiple defenders, are not the product of conscious, sequential reasoning. They emerge from a brain that has been so thoroughly shaped by repetitive engagement with football situations that the response has become automatic, expert intuition, embodied knowledge. A nervous system that can, in the fraction of a second available in a match, produce the correct action without needing to deliberate. This is not mystical. This is what neuroscience currently understands about the acquisition and execution of complex motor and cognitive skills. But here is the part that scientists are careful to add. We don't yet fully understand why some individuals, given similar environments and similar hours of practice, develop faster, further, and more completely than others. The interaction between genetic predisposition and environmental input, between the brain you were born with and the brain your experience shapes, remains one of the genuinely open questions in cognitive science. Messi's brain, processed through the environment of La Masia over critical developmental years, produced something extraordinary. Why it produced what it did, precisely, is something researchers are still working to fully understand. The honest answer is, we know a great deal. And we don't know everything. Both of those things are true. This is the question that keeps sports scientists, youth development coaches, and football executives awake at night. And the honest answer, the one that most of the experts who study these questions privately converge on, even if they are careful about how they say it publicly, is probably not. Not intentionally, not through any systematic program, however well-designed and well-resourced. Here is why. The conditions that produced Messi were not designed. They were, to a significant degree, accidental, the product of a specific convergence of factors that no one could have predicted or arranged in advance. A boy born with an unusual combination of physical and cognitive characteristics, a developmental condition that altered his growth trajectory and potentially his physical proportions. A medical treatment funded by an unusual act of institutional belief that allowed his development to continue. A family willing to uproot their lives and move to an unfamiliar continent. A youth academy that had developed, through its own institutional evolution, a specific philosophy of cognitive and technical development that happened to be extraordinarily well matched to the way this particular boy learned. A set of coaches, during his most formative years, who understood what they had and responded to it correctly. Years of personal discipline. And this part is important, because elite development requires the individual to be an active participant, not just a recipient, during which a young man chose, repeatedly, to invest in his craft when other choices were available to him. Any one of these factors, missing or different, and the story changes. Perhaps substantially. Modern sports science has become extraordinarily sophisticated. Genetic screening is beginning to be used in talent identification programs, with appropriate ethical debate around it. AI-assisted video analysis can track player movements and decision patterns at resolutions that would have been unimaginable 20 years ago. Neuroscience is beginning to offer tools for measuring and developing cognitive aspects of sports performance that were previously invisible. These advances will produce better athletes. They will produce better development programs. They may well produce footballers whose ceiling is higher than anything we have seen. But the specific configuration that produced Messi, the particular interaction of all those factors in that sequence with those outcomes, that was not engineered. It emerged. And emergence, by its nature, is not fully repeatable. This does not mean we shouldn't try to understand it. Understanding it better, even partially, is how we improve youth development, how we create more equitable access to elite coaching, how we reduce the number of extraordinary potentials that go unrealized because of accidents of geography, wealth, or the absence of the right person watching at the right moment. But we should be honest about the limits of the understanding we currently have. In 2021, at a press conference in Barcelona that was watched around the world, Lionel Messi cried. He had given 21 years of his life to FC Barcelona. He had arrived as a frightened 13-year-old who didn't know if the city would accept him. He was leaving as the greatest player in the club's history. By the consensus of almost everyone, the greatest player in the history of the sport, and the institution that had shaped him could no longer afford to keep him. He stood at a podium, and he wept. And the world watched. And in that moment, all the science fell away. All the genetics, all the neuroscience, all the developmental biology. What was left was a human being who had loved something with his entire life and was being asked to let it go. A year later, in Lusail, Qatar, on a December night that hundreds of millions of people will remember until they die, Lionel Messi lifted the World Cup. It was the only major international trophy he had not won. For years, critics had used this fact as a weapon, as if the absence of this one thing negated the evidence of thousands of other moments. As if his greatness was somehow conditional on winning a tournament. When he finally lifted the trophy, wearing the black bisht robe placed on his shoulders by the Emir of Qatar, in a gesture that was either a beautiful piece of ceremony or an unintentional visual metaphor depending on your mood, when he held that gold cup in both hands and looked up, the expression on his face was not triumph in the simple sense. It was relief and exhaustion, and something that looked, from a distance, like arrival. The boy from Rosario had arrived somewhere he had been trying to reach for a very long time. Here is what the science actually says. Lionel Messi is not great because of one gene. There is no single variant, no specific sequence of base pairs, no strand of nucleotides that contains the answer to what he became. The human genome doesn't work that way. Athletic greatness doesn't work that way. Life doesn't work that way. He is not great because of one injection, administered by one doctor, paid for by one unusual institutional gamble in 2000. He is not great because of luck, though luck, The luck of being seen by the right person, of having a family willing to take the risk, of arriving at La Masia at the right developmental moment, played a role that honest accounting cannot ignore. He is great because of a convergence. Biology that gave him specific capacities. Medicine that gave those capacities the physical conditions to develop. A family that gave everything to make the development possible. An institution that gave him a specific environment that happened to be the right one for the way his brain and body worked. Coaches who recognized what they were seeing and responded to it with appropriate sophistication. Teammates and opponents who challenged him, for years and years, to become better than he was. And, underneath all of that, a person, a human being who, at every fork in the road, chose to go deeper into the discipline. Who, when the training ended, stayed. Who, when the losses came, and the losses came, the Copa America losses, the World Cup losses, the heartbreaks that would have broken other people, chose to come back rather than retreat. Who loved this thing completely enough to give his entire life to it? Perhaps the world kept searching for Messi's secret inside his DNA. Kept looking for a clean, singular answer that would explain the inexplicable. But maybe the real secret was never hidden in his genes. Maybe it was hidden in a family's courage on a plane to Barcelona in the year 2000. In thousands of hours of training on an empty pitch after everyone else had gone home. In the decision, made again and again and again across 25 years, to be exactly what he wanted to be. Maybe the secret was never something Messi was born with. Maybe it was something he chose to become.